Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello, this is Kim Howerton. Welcome to Keto Life Support, and this is show number 83. On this show, I was joined by my friend Jonathan Shane, who's also known as the Keto Road. He is a fabulous keto coach and NTP, very interested in nutrition, and has a real perspective on things. So he really is who he is. And I really like and respect who he is. So I wanted to chat with him on the show. I think it might be refreshing for some people coming from a very dogmatic approach to keto that neither one of us tend to follow. We do mention that we used to follow. And then we're also joined by his delightful 9-month-old daughter, Haley. She was so good during this interview, you guys. You can hear her little babbles in the background, but she didn't get fussy at all. I was very impressed. So Jonathan is also a stay-at-home dad, and so that's why we were joined by Ms. Haley. So I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging chat where we get into a bunch of different stuff and just have a conversation, because that's what I do. Less an interview, more a conversation. Enjoy today's episode. Welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton, and I am joined by my good friend, Jonathan Shane, also known as the Keto Road.
What's up? What's up? I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Kim.
You're welcome. Good. Jonathan and I know each other mostly from conferences. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I met you at KetoCon in 2019. And then I saw you again at the Keto Summit. Yeah, mostly conferences for sure.
Cool. And we're also joined by Jonathan's lovely daughter.
Yes, Miss Haley. You might hear some babbles. She's just agreeing with me. At least that's what I tell myself.
Got it. Okay, good. Back up. So tell me a little bit about how you got into, I know your story, but maybe some people don't. So give me a survey of Jonathan Shane.
I love it. Yeah, elevator speech. So my journey started when I was younger. Due to some situations, family-wise and habits I picked up on, I developed some emotional eating habits. Turned into a lot of binge eating, which led to when I was 14, I was 260 pounds. Had a very blunt conversation with my doctor, sent me on this spiral of health journey. Lost a bunch of weight really fast, just, typical cut out all the fat out of my diet. But in doing so, I struggle with social acceptance. And I say that very lightly, but it's a lot deeper than that. But it kind of wove into me developing this fear of fat and weight gain, which ultimately led to my development of bulimia. Struggled with bulimia for about 8 years. And then in August of 2017, I stumbled upon the ketogenic diet. I was doing it as a fad, honestly. I was doing it to try and get the last couple of pounds off, but I found I had so much more control with my food choices. And then I went 9 months without a bulimic relapse, which is the longest I'd ever went since I developed an eating disorder. And I realized that there was more to it, but I was onto something. And so I started speaking out about it. I started talking about, being vulnerable with as a man, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, and really working on the mental piece and creating this idea of ketogenic holistic health. And then since then, I've been 3 years, as of September of this year, I'm 3 years bulimia free. I haven't relapsed since. And I spend my time coaching others on how to develop a holistic, healthy mindset and lose weight and keep it off. So that's where we are.
Nice. And you've done a variety of things, right? You also did at one point, a bodybuilding show.
Correct. So I took on the idea of wanting to be a natural bodybuilder. I say taking on the idea because I'll never say I actually classified as one, because I don't know. I just we look at our friend Robert Sykes, right? He's been doing it for over a decade, right? He's just an absolute savage. And I liked it. I enjoyed coming at it with that level of intensity. But I found that just due to the life I had, it just handling, doing bodybuilding competitively, that being my focus when I went into the gym all the time year round just wasn't my stick. So ended up diving into running, and somehow I just fell in love with it. So I ended up going from ketogenic bodybuilding to ketogenic low carb endurance running. And that is me, man. I'm there. I love it.
Great. So you're a very active person. Have you always been active?
Oh, yes. Even when I was heavier, I just ate really bad and I ate a lot, but I was always running. I was always on the move. I was always outside. When I first lost weight, I ran a lot. I worked out a lot. I was the hardest during football practice. I was always like the hard, try hard. Like I always put in a lot of effort. I was always active, super active.
Got it. I find, in the weight loss space, whatever keto or any weight loss involved spaces, I find there's a variety. There's the like always active, super worky outy people. And then the people that more like me, where it's like, I have to really push myself to get off the sofa.
Yeah, no, a couple of our close friends are the same way. I totally get that.
I'm like, but it's so nice here in this prone position.
Right?
Yeah. Anyway.
Who wants to stand up and move?
I mean, feet, really? I mean, more decorative. So anyway, yeah. So I reached out to you when I saw you made a post. I probably should have looked at the exact post again before we talked today. But one of the things I've noticed recently that I've been dealing with is, I went keto. And at the time, like I tried all sorts of approaches to weight loss my whole life. And I went keto for the weight loss too, right? And it was like really the first thing that weight loss felt, I don't want to say easy, but like the change of lifestyle felt like it wasn't torturous. It was the first time I felt like my eating I was able to control my eating and I wasn't binging all the time. And it was sort of it felt like almost like my personality around food changed after I went keto.
Exactly.
And so for me, it was like keto felt like a miracle. And then over the years, though, been through different ups and downs and trainings and learnings and come out the other side where now I feel like a very different person than I was a half decade ago. Whereas I could not moderate my eating at all at one time. Now I feel like even now it's like I have a lot more flexibility in my food choices without feeling like it's going to set off a binge. It's almost like I've transitioned from somebody who could only be an abstainer to somebody who now could potentially be a moderator. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of biological and psychological reasons for that. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that is very important to me, I will end this monologue soon, is, when I look out in the world, I often see people who are like, we are keto, it is keto is us, 100%, it's all about the carbs. And, if you're not keto, if you're not for us, you're against us, right? Like it is this thing, it is a kind of the keto cult. And then on the other side, there are sort of what I would call very judgmentally more like the bros or the people who are kind of anti-keto, who are like, it's all about calories. Keto is nonsense. It may make you feel more satiated, but as soon, it's not what you all make it out to be. And so there are these kind of two opposite camps, and it makes it very hard to have like a nuanced discussion in the middle where it's like, you can acknowledge that keto is very special. And at the same time, it's not the only way, or there can be different nuances to nutrition. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And I think it comes down to this word that I found when I was getting my clinical certification as an FNCP, and that word is bio-individuality. There is a uniqueness in all of us that we need to take into consideration when we're advising and we're giving people advice. And I think it's important too, but that has to be mixed with our foundational truths too, right? Like I don't want someone to compromise their foundational truths just to appease an individual. But I think it's really important that on our foundational truths, we're willing to navigate what we build for each person in a unique setting. And I think that that's where like that keto plus carbs, the idea of metabolic flexibility, right? That's where all that comes into play. Cause it's like, okay, yes, I believe in these core values, but what can I add on top of this to make this person as optimal as possible? Not as optimal as I can get, because I know what makes me optimal, but what makes them optimal, right? Like if I'm coaching Elizabeth, just random name, right? If I'm coaching Elizabeth, like she's not going to eat like I eat. And it would be, in my opinion, it would be wrong of me to put my diet on her, to put my exactly how I do things on top of her. In fact, or rather, I should say, I would rather give her my core values and then build on top of that. And I think that that's the best way to approach it. But I do see that that's a problem in the space, because I think two things. I think one, from a ideological standpoint, I don't know if that's a real word, Aaron.
It is.
Ideological standpoint, and then also from a tribalism standpoint. I think we naturally gravitate towards groups, and we don't realize that we're doing it, but we tend to put off other groups just because. Even if
they're not our people.
Exactly. Even if consciously we don't, right? We can say we don't, but I think subconsciously we do create the alienation. And I think that's normal for all humans. That's not any subset group, keto or otherwise. I think we all
I think it's actually an evolutionary thing, right?
Absolutely.
That we survived as a species because we formed these tribes so that we could be supported and nurtured and not starve to death. And, like evolutionarily, we are a tribal peoples. And so it's not surprising that we then take that into everything.
No, absolutely. And I think that's where part of that friction comes from. And I think also like ideology, when I say, I don't think ideology is a bad deal. Like, I don't think that there's anything wrong with having faith in an idea. In fact, I think a lot of humans miss out on that. And that's why they don't live as powerful and profound lives as they should. But the reality of having an ideology is that you become very focused on those core things and you don't deviate at all, which is fine for you if that works for you. But what about Susan? What about Elizabeth? What about Karen, right? Like, what do they need? And if they're not at their best following exactly what you do, are you willing to expand upon and try different things with them that might not necessarily go exactly how you would like them to go, to make sure they're getting exactly what they need, right? And if you're not willing to do that, I think that you should at least find them somebody that's willing to do that, or kind of look at and figure out, okay, how can I navigate this better?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you have to have a perspective in the world, or else you're useless, right?
Yeah.
Someone who doesn't stand for anything is a problem. And so you have to I think you have to know what you think. That seems like a very easy statement to make, but I think a lot of people, they vacillate around, but you have to believe in what you think, and you have to be able to back up what you believe. But you also have to have the flexibility to know that there's more in the world than you can know at any one time. And so you always have to be learning and growing. And so when I first got into keto, I was very dogmatic. I don't know about you, but like when I first found keto, it was like, it is this way. And if you do this, you are wrong. And I was like keto police central, because some of my personal failings are, and I'm judgmental and opinionated and, and bossy. And,
I remember when I used to not let my clients put pepper on their food because a teaspoon of pepper was 6 grams of carbs, and I was not having it. Not allowed.
Right. Or, I think I did. I was like, watch how much cinnamon you put on that.
Dude, 5 grams of carbs per teaspoon. These people don't know. They're messing up.
Right.
Ketosis.
And, so we all have our embarrassing, I call it my teen keto years, that time when you're like, when you're an adult and you're like, what was I wearing?
Oh, I love it.
God. It was like, I was a teenage ketoer.
I love that.
And then, you get to a point and you're like, okay, what really matters? What's really important? What's like long-term success look like? And then, bio-individuality. What is the range of approaches? And then the other complicated one is that bio-individuality doesn't just mean each person. It means each person at each time with other factors.
Yeah.
Right. So you at 25 versus you at 45, you exercising versus not exercising, you with low insulin versus you with high insulin, all different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've had female clients, for example, they'll work with me when I first started, and they were in their like late 40s, and we ate one way and it worked. But then they came back to me post menopause and like, hey, this ain't working anymore. And it's like, well, you're a completely different human being, basically internally. So let's figure out what works doing, X, Y, and Z. And here's the thing I really want to run home too, is like the foundational values, the core values of their diet didn't change. It was the little things that we tweaked to add on top of that made all the difference. We can get into examples of that for sure. But I think that's super important too, is like with me, like the core values didn't change, right? Which I think is important because like you said, you have to have something you believe in. You have to have a certain kind of ideology. And you want to make sure that the way that you're coaching stands on that, because that's your presence. That's who you are. That's what you believe in, right? And if you don't believe in something, who's going to believe you? So it's like, what are the core values? But then like, what can you add on top of that? And it varies from, I love that you said that, because I think some people listening to this might go, yeah, well, I eat this way. And then they look back at, I've been eating this way for 6 years. What in my life has changed? What do I need to do different? Maybe that's what's happening, right? And I think it's important that people are self-aware like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just a crazy example, and I'm sure it can all change. Hi, baby. So cute. And I want to give you total props to be having a coherent conversation while there is a toddler in your room, because I'm not a parent. So, but I'm like, what are they, what's happening? Anyway.
Being a stay-at-home dad is a whole nother podcast. It's so much fun though. I love it.
Oh, have you listened to any or seen any of what Ryan Holiday has, a dad podcast or a dad? You know who Ryan Holiday is?
Yes. I did not know he had a dad podcast.
I don't know if it's a podcast or a channel or a website, but he's got a dad thing. Something like The Daily Dad or something like that.
I like it.
Anyway,
check it out.
You have to check it out, because I figure you might like the Stoics.
Oh, I do. 100%.
Yeah. So when I first started keto, and then like a good couple of years into keto, if I ate a lot of vegetables, I found I was hungrier. I was literally like, I am hungrier after the broccoli than I was without including the broccoli. And that's weird. And then now I get totally full. If it totally helps my satiety to include actually quite a bit of vegetable in my meal. So if I have a salad that essentially just adds a teeny bit of, actually I like a lot of lettuce, but like a couple of carbs, but maybe more, and I'm adding that to my meal, that extra volume or fiber or whatever it is. Now I'm like, oh, that totally helps me feel fuller. And it's super interesting that I'm like, it's like 5 years later, what is this? And, having to be open to not just in yourself, obviously, but your clients, believing them when they tell you something that totally goes against what you think should be happening, but for whatever reason with them at that time is not happening.
Yeah. So on the veggies, I think that's an interesting point, because it goes back to that bio-individuality, right? With changes in environments, when I think of, what is broccoli mostly? Fiber, right? It's mostly fiber and things that impact your gut health. So obviously your gut has healed. You're on the other side of gut microbiome change, which has allowed a different response. Because like Dr. David Plummeter does amazing work. There's a book called Brain Maker and Grain Brain. And there are fantastic reads on how your gut is impacting your satiation hormones, your neurotransmitters, serotonin. Crazy. The relationship between bad guts and depression and anxiety. It's insane. But my point is that, when you started, your gut might not have been in the best place. And so those fibers and things just kind of triggered, something in you. And then as you stuck with it and your gut microbiome started to change, they started to get to the point where they actually enjoy those kinds of foods, because they give that gut profile what they need to be more satiated. And I think that, that's powerful. And I think it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like that idea of like, you're not who you were 4 years ago. You're not who you were 6 years ago. So what can you do now to make yourself better? Because I think at the end of the day, like the goal, I've thought about this a lot, over my years of coaching, I always ask myself, what is the end goal? What's the point of weight loss? What's the point of health? And I realized that the answer is to be your best self. And realizing that to be optimal looks different in different seasons of your life, and figuring out what that is and being flexible with that, I think is super important as a client, as a person in general, and as a coach, coaching other people on how to be their best selves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you think about it, is your goal to fit a cookie cutter definition, or is your goal to be a healthy person? It's kind of a no-brainer of what you're trying to do. Like, do you want to be like, no, I'm following all the rules of this way of eating, so I'm a good person? Or do you want to be like, I am living a great life and healthy?
Exactly. But I don't think the question's asked like that often. And I think that's one of the problems in the keto space is it's not asked like that. It's, do you want to be in nutritional ketosis, right? Do you want to the very generic keto questions, and people they grab onto these very simple ideals, which is great because people need simple ideals to get through very scientific situations, but they grab onto these and they're not flexible at all. And so when things start to go wrong, that's one thing I hate about simple keto instructions, is because when people start to feel really bad, they just blame it on keto. They're like, oh, keto is not for me. And they don't look at the fact that, okay, maybe the way that they're doing it isn't for them, but they have no idea how to be strategic with variabilities, because it's this way. I posted a quick TikTok, keto dinner for my wife. She came home from work, and it was salad with organic soybean and canola oil, free ranch, smoked turkey I smoked myself, and some butternut squash with butter. And somebody commented, well, butternut squash isn't keto. It has more sugar than zucchini. And I was like, it has 5 more carbs per cup. Are you seriously hosting? You're why people feel so right? Because could you imagine you think you're doing something right, and then someone takes squash from your diet?
Totally.
And then you take it out and you're miserable. And you're like, I guess keto is not for me. And they go back to a standard American diet. It's all you had to do was not tell them not to eat squash, and they were happy. Why'd you ruin it?
Totally. Well, yeah. And like I said, when I was a keto teenager, I was that person who was like, And now I'm like, duh, because, when you really get down to it, I was at the grocery store the other day because my boyfriend's like, why are you always gone for an hour when you go to the grocery store? Because I'm like, I'm reading labels. I'm still reading labels. There's a new product, and I pulled down 2 different packages of chocolate. There were something in the chocolate aisle, and one was keto product, and it had, this many grams of that and this and these ingredients. And then this other product was not labeled as keto and had some ingredients in it that a lot of people would be like, well, that's not keto. But when I looked at the actual nutritional difference, and I was like, actually, the one that has I am not advocating people eat a ton of sugar, but this product had a little bit of sugar in it versus the other product had a bunch of sugar alcohols in it. And again, I'm not against sugar alcohols, but when I looked at these 2 products, I was like, I feel like we're drawing kind of arbitrary lines about what can be called keto and what can't. And I agree, because I was that person. So I'm speaking to myself here, but I think we draw these lines and we never question these lines. And it's why is a cup of pumpkin okay, but a half cup of apple isn't, even though that half cup of apple compared to it's we draw some lines rather than on the effect, but on a math formula.
No, exactly. Verbiage rather than physiological reaction. And that's one of the big things I've been trying, and I don't do it super harsh because I know I'm much more of a motivational influencer, but I do have, I have an education in nutrition. And so I try to use it. But yeah, I agree. Something that, and I used to be that person. I'm totally,
we were that people. We get it.
The same wavelength. When I was looking at this keto granola from Costco, super clean keto ingredients, 16 total carbs per serving, right? And I was looking at this brand called Elizabeth's granola. Oh yeah, I've seen that one. Right? Uh-huh. Grain-free granola. It's sweetened with honey and maple syrup, but it's only 10 total carbs per serving. Why am I eating the keto one when it has more carbs, when I could be eating something that has almost half the carbs, mind you, and everything in it grows from the ground or is made by something in nature? Why? You see what I'm saying? So
totally.
And not only that, but something that I've been really trying to run home lately is that, and I have CGMs to back this up. I have the data. I'm not just talking out of thin air here, but I am completely convinced that whole food carbohydrates with the proper amount of fats and proteins have a better physiological response in your system than sugar alcohols. I can show you 4 tests right now of a piece of fruit like apple or berries with a good amount of fat with heavy cream or almond butter or something, and then compare it to me eating a serving, so a third of a Lily's bar, and my body responds way better to the natural one. I'm fuller, I'm more satiated, and I'm still keeping my carbs within ketogenic macros. But yet my body physiologically is responding better. And I'm like, we're so hell-bent on sticking to certain terms of use of the diet that we're not willing to see that a lot of the stuff we're eating just to say we're keto isn't even natural. It's not even It's not the way our ancestors used to eat, which if we look at keto, when you and me started, there wasn't a lot of keto products, right? Like we did eat naturally for the most part. And so I don't know, like that's one of my big sticks right now is like navigating the idea of like a whole food ketogenic diet and helping people realize that like eating from the ground with your ketogenic macros, and sometimes not depending on situation, is better for you than being willing to eat certain foods just because they fit within a certain label.
Right. And I'm not anti erythritol. You know what I mean? Like I'm not, you may be, and we can
I'm not,
agree to disagree,
No.
But yeah, but, and I certainly, feel better eating something sweetened with erythritol than a ton of sugar. But the other reality is I just don't know that we should be eating things with a ton of sugar, period. So it gets complex, but I think it just can keep coming back to bio-individuality.
Agreed.
Like I have worn a CGM. I've tested all sorts of things. I don't seem to have a bad response to a variety of sugar alcohols or rare sugars, right? Like my blood sugar seems to do totally fine with those. I've even done some insulin testing around, times when I've used more or less of them. It seems okay. But I also know other people, and I believe them when they say that makes my blood sugar go up or that makes my blood sugar go up. And when we really get to products, it becomes such a minefield. I did an interview with a guy who makes keto products, and he makes pretty good keto products. Like I've tested them on my blood sugar and a lot of my clients, they do well. The total carbs are actually pretty high because he uses a lot of soluble corn fiber, which jacks the carbs way up. But I reached out to him because I was like, why does my blood sugar not go up when I eat your soluble corn fiber or tapioca fiber? They're kind of similar, right? Soluble tapioca fiber.
I like tapioca, but yeah.
So like, I'm not saying they're the exact same thing, but as a concept, soluble tapioca fiber or soluble corn fiber.
Yeah.
As a concept, and I was like, but why, when I eat your product, is my blood sugar completely level? But there's this other product that I can get at the store that's a chocolate that just jacks me through the roof, like more than a regular chocolate bar. Now, when I say regular, I don't mean like a Reese's or like, a candy. I mean like a pure, like good quality dark chocolate, but that has a little sugar. But this keto freebie chocolate, I'll go through the roof compared to my, Whole Foods, organic, blah, 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 fancy origin grown chocolate. And I was like, and the first ingredient is the same. It's tapioca fiber or corn fiber, just like yours. So what's the difference? And he's like, there are like 10 grades of those fibers. And some are very close to sugar and some are very close to all fiber. And these companies don't have to disclose that on their labels.
Yeah, products are messed up, but I think it comes back also to like bio-individuality, right? Because some people, the conversation will always go back to that because it's like some people, like corn fiber, for example, spikes my blood sugar, but I have clients that it doesn't, right? Like, and so, with keto ingredients and stuff, I think that we have to be, I think it's important to read labels, but I also think it's important to test, right? To test.
Read your body.
Figure out what works best for you. Because like at the end of the day, like even though I'm a coach and I have a lot of experience, I'm not you. And what I was talking about earlier, the way that I like to do the whole idea of like a whole food keto approach, all my clients don't eat that way. And that's okay because they don't like that. Their blood sugar doesn't handle what I do well, but their blood sugar handles what I don't like, what my blood sugar does when I eat the way that I tell them to eat, but it works best for them. And again, it's just that idea of like being able to be flexible, understand what your core values are, and then help people navigate that in their own way is super important.
Totally. Yeah. I had a client last week who got a CGM and she was traveling and she was like, I want to be able to eat out more and sometimes make choices that aren't 100% keto. And so I was like, well, go for it. See what happens. So she started eating a variety of things and seeing and she's like, I can eat a half a potato and my blood sugar doesn't do anything bad. But if I have a half a slice of bread, which has fewer total carbs than the potato, she's like, my blood sugar is like 200. And that's that you don't know just from reading a label. You have to see what your body does with the information.
I agree. I do think it's important too, though.
Yeah.
I have two thoughts, but one of them is not part of the topic of this conversation yet. We'll see.
Feel free to say whatever you want.
Okay. So then two things. The first one is, I think that it's important to figure out what you can eat. And this is my personal opinion. You should always eat with purpose. And so like there are things I guess I could get away with eating, but I would never eat them because they're not really purposeful for me. And I think where a lot of people lose track with the conversation we're having is they'll hear something like this, maybe not, and somebody won't mention something like what we're talking about right now. Okay. And they'll go off and eat whatever they want. And they'll, what? I can get away with a bolus of rice. And they just go crazy, and it ends up developing old bad habits coming back, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, what happened? And it's like, well, you weren't eating with purpose. You were eating because you could, and just getting away with things. And I think that if people are going to be testing these things, they need to, do you feel good right now? Is there anything lacking in life? If the answer is no, then don't fix something that's not broke. But if you're following like a certain way of keto and you don't feel your best, be willing to be flexible enough with yourself and passionate enough to find your best self with yourself, that you're willing to try things to figure out what makes you feel better and what your body responds best to. And I think that that's the golden ticket for most people, for sure.
Yeah. When I think back on my pre-keto to now, the thing that has really, if I had to pick the one thing that has shifted, is that I no longer see food as I love food. I'm a foodie. Like I look forward to food. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that. I no longer look at food as like a bonanza, going to the carnival every day. What can I get away with? What can I fill my day with? Like, it's not my sole source of entertainment. And I now think what you eat has consequences. Sound so bad, but food is how you deliver nutrients to your body. Yeah. And so if I'm wasting all my opportunities on being entertained instead of trying to make the most nutritious foods as entertaining as possible, right? Then it's like going shopping for solely what it looks like, but paying no attention to the season. It's like, oh, I like this outfit, but it's winter and I froze to death. That's not good.
I totally agree. One of the first things so when I became a keto coach, one of the first things I ever said to my first client ever in our very first conversation, and I'm still passionate about that to this day. The ultimate goal is to make you no longer see food as fun, but fuel that can be enjoyed. And if you look at it like that, that is the right slice of cake, keto cake, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, pie, whatever. Yeah. And I think there's a variety of personalities. And I still very much lean in the I love to love food and I want to be a food lover. But at the same time, you only have a small tolerance for wasted food opportunities, right? There are certain, I don't know if this makes sense. Maybe you can agree or disagree, but if I'm focused on nutritional value, if I'm focused on health, if I'm focused on making sure that I'm maintaining the right balance in my life with food, the room I have for food that is not helpful, right? For purely entertaining yet non-nourishing food, there's a very small allowance for that. Because the good stuff just has to push out the funnel cakes, right? Like the junk food, I think of junk food as any food that doesn't fulfill my nutritional needs.
I would agree. And at the same time, let me explain. So I have a 90.
Tell me.
So I have a 90-10 rule, right? So 90% of the time I eat whole foods. I stay within my ketogenic macros, but I eat whole foods, right? If I want something sweet, I'm going to opt for fruit or something like that over a keto treat. However, 10% of the time I do enjoy treats and things that don't help me in my nutrition goals.
Sure. Yeah.
However, within that 10%, there's no, I still don't eat funnel cakes. Never. I will never eat white flour. I will never eat my idea of a 10% treat is the keto treat instead of whole food. I'll never deviate past that point. Because even the foods that don't meet my nutrition requirements, I still want to make sure that they don't impact me in any negative way. I don't want to say that, and people listening, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that if you decide to have a slice of cake at a wedding, your body's going to be impacted negatively and you're going to destroy your life. But for me personally, when I look at food, each time I go to eat, the same question always crosses my mind. Is this going to help me or not help me? And if the answer is it's not going to help me, I ask myself, well, is it worth it? And I go, yeah, it's a sugar alcohol. It's not going to negatively impact me. It's not going to cause any issues that I know of. I'm going to enjoy this time. But 90% of the time, I want that answer to just be a flat yes. And that's kind of how I navigate it. So
I don't know that that's different than what I was just poorly communicating.
You said funnel cakes, Kim. Okay.
I was giving an extreme example. I have not actually, I don't think I've ever had a funnel cake, which is why
What?
I'm like right. I'm from California. I don't think they make them here. I just heard about them and I was like, well, that sounds like a good example.
You've never had a funnel cake? You know what? Disregard everything I just said and go eat one. Everything I just said. That was for me. Go eat one. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, there are a lot of things. We now have Chick-fil-A in California, but when I started in the keto world, there were none. And so people would always be like, well, what do you get at Chick-fil-A? And I'm like, Chick-a-Phil? I don't know what this place is. Anyway, so it's very regional.
Did you say Chick-a-Phil?
That's what I kept seeing Chick-fil-A and I didn't, because I'd never heard it said out loud. I'd only seen it written. I didn't get that it was filet. And somehow the A got moved in my mind. So I kept calling like Chick-a-Phil. What is this?
Oh, I love it. I'm never going to call it anything different now. No, never again.
But yeah, I mean, I guess once you really embrace the idea that food is nutritionally, it sounds weird, but that food is nutrition, it colors your thoughts in such a way that what to eat becomes a very different question than it was when we were in our bingey days.
Yeah, a good way to do it is remind yourself. I think that something that we're taught as kids is you are what you eat. And I don't think we really understand how literal that statement is. You are what you eat. So a good way to hack into this, just the practice, is when you go to eat something, ask yourself, do I want to be made out of this? And if the answer is no, you probably shouldn't eat it, right? It's weird to think that if you eat a Twinkie, for example, the fats in that Twinkie are going to be what make up the cell membranes that allow or don't allow certain enzymes, hormones, and pathogens in and out of your cells. That scares the hell out of me. I don't want a Twinkie, right? No. So I think that asking that question is a good icebreaker for anybody because it's true. It holds very true. And I think it can help us navigate those questions or those answers.
Yeah. And then it's all about finding your path. And I think, a lot of people, when they first come to keto, they're like, just tell me what to do because I am overwhelmed. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. And I do think that you can start with a template, a cookie cutter approach, like a food list even. Eat these things, not those things. And then I don't know a single person, though, that has had long-term, I should say, a broken clock is right twice a day. So there are just the percentage of the population that food list worked perfectly for them. It was like lock and key, and they just use that food list for the rest of their life. But I think most people who end up failing at keto, long term say, well, I followed this food list for a while and then I didn't feel good. It stopped working for me, fill in the blank. And then keto didn't work. I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, but it's no, that approach to keto didn't work.
Yeah. So the way I handle it, just to give a practical example, is with my name, right? The Keto Road. We were talking about names earlier before the recording, right? How does that work? So this is the conclusion I came to. My main goal is to help people create a foundation of fat metabolism for their life, right? So the idea of a road is your life. And on top of that road needs to be a foundation of fat metabolism because that's the number one thing missing from American diets. The fact that people can't, I was thinking about this today before our call. The fact that people can't switch between fat and carbs as fuel is a huge red flag because you're designed to be able to do that naturally. So the first thing you need to do is establish fat metabolism and fat efficiency. And so all my clients, they get a food list, just like you said, and they have a certain carb allotment, right? It's depending on the person, it's 10 grams of total carbs to 30 grams of total carbs. And they follow that sucker for at least 6 to 8 weeks. Once that's done, then we really start to play with protein thresholds, fat thresholds, carb thresholds, right? What do they need to keep their cortisol in check, right? How are their hormones reacting to their cycles if they're a female or if they're an endurance athlete or this or that, what's going on and what thresholds on different macronutrients fit you best. So at the end of the day, we are making sure your hormones are balanced and you're burning fat as much as you need as efficiently as possible. And like, that's my foundational core value and end goal. But if you notice, like after that 8-week period, my macros on my clients look wildly different. Like each one of my clients is wildly different, which is on purpose because they all need different things, at certain points in the game.
Right. So, speaking of that, one of the things that I've run up against, and we talked about this as we first started, is the word keto can kind of be a blessing and a curse at the same time, which is like both of us on our social media, you're the keto road, I'm the ketonist. As soon as you step anywhere outside of that keto police box in either content or information or just showing how you live your life, right? Like your example with your wife, there are always people who are like, that's not how to do it. How have you navigated this social media-ly?
Oh man, no one's actually asked me that question. That's the first time someone's asked me that. I think I struggled with it at first because I knew what I wanted to do. I knew the audience I wanted to reach, and I knew the kind of impact and the message I had to bring to the table. Yeah. And I knew that it was very different than what I had, one, originally thought, and two, what the general tribe, the keto tribe believes, right? In terms of like whole foods and bio-individuality above all, but like whole foods and 90-10 rules, mindset, And so for a while, I was shy about it. I was super shy about it. Now, I do think that before you say something you believe in, you should be able to back it up. I think data, you should be able to back up what you're saying. Like, don't just say something because you tried it once. You went to a party, you had champagne, you didn't wake up with a hangover. Now champagne's totally cool.
I have cured hangovers.
Go crazy, right? No, have some data to back up what you're saying. Have proof. But I cowered for a while because I was scared of that retaliation. And this is what I came to realize. And I hope that what I'm about to say is impactful for you and anybody else that's listening that's an influencer and has a certain message they have to bring. I realized that even if I got backlash from majority, there's a minority of people that could really benefit from what I have to say, and their lives could be changed. And the reality is that I'm never going to impact the majority. Right? Like, even if I got 1 million followers, let's say I got 1 million followers tomorrow, that'd be awesome. I'd freak out, right? But there's 7 billion people in this world. That's a blip. It's nobody. It's absolutely there's so many other people that need help. And my message is not what they need. It's the message you have or the message that whoever has, right? So for that reason, you should stick to your message, believe in your message, be able to back up your message, but pursue it full force and know that the people that need your help are going to come to you. And that's all you need to worry about. And so when I was able to wrap my mind around that and be confident in my message and who I was, that's when I really started to post. I think you're talking about at the beginning of the talk was my CGM post about the apple and peanut butter and how first thing in the morning, my blood sugar didn't even go up. It didn't even go up. There was nothing. And I was like, if I'm going to have carbs, right, within my macros, whole food carbs, I'm going to have fruit first thing in the morning because that's what works for me. And I never would have posted that 2 years ago. I would have been scared out of my mind to post it. And you know what? It didn't even get that much attention. It got 30 likes. Do I care? No, because the 30 people that liked it were impacted by it. And if it helped them, which I got comments that it did, just one person, if it just helps one person, then I know I impacted the person I was supposed to impact. And I was able to help them adopt a better ketogenic diet for them or a better diet in general for them. And I think if you come at it from that headspace, which isn't always easy to do, right? Because we can be self-conscious and we want acceptance. I think all humans do. But I think being able to stay in your lane and just focus on what you're passionate about, I think that's what really brings true fruitfulness and purpose to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that was very well articulated, given that I threw that one out at you. Although I was a little distracted by the cute baby.
She has a lot to say.
She does. She's like that. So you're training her well.
Thank you. Yeah. That's a whole baby diet is a whole nother conversation.
Whole thing. I know. Well, there's a lot of people, right? Well, there's you and there's Lauren Berryhill and there's Nisha with little Beckett. And there's a lot of keto parents out there, trying to feed their children well.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's fun. And it also sucks because the better I feed her and the better she develops, the more it pains me to see other parents not feed their kids well and them not develop well. And let me also preface up front, I'm not judging. It's not a judgmental statement. Oh, she's waving.
Hi.
it's not judgmental. And I understand that some of these things are genetic and hereditary, and I get that. But there's so much more that parents could be doing. And it's not even that they don't know. They're so ignorant to it. And ignorant's not like, I'm not calling them stupid. Ignorant as in they just don't know.
They just don't know.
And I feel bad. And so it does suck because I just see that a lot more now. I'm a lot more hyper aware of it because of how well she's doing, because of the way I feed her, getting her outside, getting her in the sunlight, getting her hands in the dirt, feeding her, proteins and fats first. And if she gets carbs, it's in the form of, low glycemic fruits, right? And, she doesn't eat any packaged foods, very rarely. And I think that's a whole other conversation. But it's fun. Are you having fun waving at her? Do you realize there's a human on the computer?
It's like, that might be a TV thing. I don't know. I'm like Blippi. I don't know. So, yeah. And I also think there's that whole, like, as your kids are growing up discussion around, like, where do you draw your boundaries? How do you deal with other families, people, grandparents, cousins, birthday parties? I mean, it's a whole thing.
Yeah. So I think that for me, I really am hyper aware of eating habits with her because I had an eating disorder. I think the biggest thing is I don't want to make her afraid of food. I never want to tell her no, right? Like, I mean, I'm going to tell her no, but you know what I mean? Like psychologically, I don't want to be this idea of like, this food is, you can't have this food. Because that in humans, it naturally intends this rebellious, like, ooh, I'm going to have that food. Tell them not to put their hand in the cookie jar. They're going to put it in the cookie jar a lot more, right?
Yeah. But
I think that where I stand on it, and this is something I've thought about and talked to my wife about, is at the end of the day, she doesn't have money. So what comes into the house, what comes into the house, she can't control. So it's not that when we go to the store, it's not that she has money and we tell her she can't buy cookies. She just doesn't see Oreos because we don't buy Oreos, right? And right now with grandparents and other parents, I am kind of strict. Like I tell people up front, like if I see you giving my child candy, they will not be left alone with you. Like, don't do it. Like I'm very stern about that because she doesn't know. And so she's given something involuntarily and that's not right on my account. The only person that should be giving her something when she's not aware of what it is her parents. The minute she becomes aware, right, that consciousness starts to really kick in, she has every right to say yes or no. And I'm going to give her that choice. She's not going to get it at my house, but if she's at a party and she wants a cupcake, I'm going to go, sweetie, if you want the cupcake, have it. But I know what's going to happen. She's going to eat it and she's going to feel like garbage. And then she's not going to eat it as often. And you know what? She might eat it sometimes because it's worth it to feel like poop. She really wants the cupcake. That's fine. That's her choice.
Right. We know like there's a big difference between a metabolically healthy kid who eats the right diet 95% of the time and occasionally has a cupcake at a birthday party versus a kid whose every single meal is like a cupcake at a birthday party.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, 100%, which is why I'm not really stressing it. I think as long as we stick to our core values, the things that she navigates when she's older will be on her. And I think that in the long run, she'll be where she needs to be. I trust her to empower herself.
And I really appreciate that about your approach, like in thinking about the fact that having your daughter have a healthy relationship with food from a mental perspective is super important because it can be challenging to do so in any approach, right? Like how many of us grew up with dieting moms? I don't know if your mom was a major dieter.
My mom was an emotional eater. So that's where I got my emotional eating from.
Yeah. But I mean, we all have food baggage. I think it's a rare person that doesn't have food baggage of some kind. And so, thinking about that as you're raising your kids, I don't have kids. I'm an auntie, but thinking about it, I really appreciate that in the world.
Well, thank you. And I bet you're the best auntie. I could just see you being the best auntie. I feel it.
I'm the auntie that lets them get away with almost anything except crap eating.
I love it. That's the kind of auntie I want in my life. I love it. That's great.
I'm like, we can go wherever you want. We can do whatever you want. I don't care. But let's not eat that.
Yeah. I love it.
Anyway, mostly because I tell them I don't do the body thing. I'm like, you are a hyper child and I do not want to deal with you when you are like that.
That's a whole nother thing, man. Like one thing, Danny Vegas said, dude, it just totally blew my mind. He was like, I can't stand it when parents feed their kids sugar and then get mad at their kids for acting up. And I'm like, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like, why would you want to mess with their brain chemistry?
Exactly. Yeah. But it's also good to know, like I know, like, and obviously I don't know, but I know from like afar that like if they were to like have a cupcake and they were to be a little bit more hyper, like Danny just wouldn't be like, rah, he'd be like, okay, I know why this is going on. Like, there would be mercy and grace there. And I think that's a really powerful aspect because that goes back to their relationship with food, right? Like, if I eat this, daddy's mad at me, And like, I think that just having that level of depth of intuition when it comes to your children is just breathtaking.
Yeah, it's so important to understand that we've gone very far afield, but that understanding right? in the world, it's like, and you can apply it to yourself. Like, I was a person who spent a lot of my life depressed and I had binge eating problems and I didn't know how to manage myself and I blamed myself all the time. And I see so many of my clients really not liking themselves. And at its core, you can be like, am I being influenced in a way that, not to say like, it's not my fault, whatever, but to say like, am I being influenced in a way that I'm not taking into account? And I'm not, in fact, crazy. I'm actually drugged or, and maybe I need to address the substances in my life rather than feeling like I'm like elementally damaged.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's no different than like, the idea of, going back to nutrition, right? Like the idea of like everything in moderation. And it's like, like people are like, oh, you're not addicted to sugar. You're not addicted to the cake. You're not addicted to the cookies.
That you can't be.
You just don't know how to balance. And it's like, you're going to take these people on this crazy roller coaster ride instead of just empowering them to choose to not eat a certain food and be okay with it. Like no human needs Twinkies. And if it makes you feel bad, and it probably will, you don't need it, and be empowered enough to choose not to eat it. But like the diet culture as a whole doesn't speak like that. I find it interesting when like nutritionists and stuff, like they say diet culture tells you not to eat carbs. And I'm like, do you not realize that keto, even though we find it big, is a very small subset of the diet culture? No, the diet culture tells us that balance is key and sends hundreds of thousands of people on this spiral because they don't want to look at the substances in their life, as you put. And I think that's a really powerful mindset shift, what you just said.
Yeah, I think, I'm old. So I just recently started watching some, like, one day, literally, this was like a month or two ago. I was like, what is this button on my Instagram? And I watched some reels. And then I was like, and now it's 4 hours later. What has happened? But I watched some reels and, some of them just pop up where it's like young fitness people who are like things that make me mad. And it's like keto and this and that. And I always have to stop and be like, okay, have they met my clients, right? Like, who is this fitness influencer interacting with in the world? If they're a coach or a trainer, like who comes to them and what are they seeing versus what I see? Because what I see are like 40 to 60-year-old diabetic, exhausted, depleted, 300-pound people, right? Like, it's like, this is a certain population. And I don't say you don't have to fit all those characteristics, but like, this is a population that is very different than the gym person, the 22-year-old who tries keto to lose the 5 pounds they don't need to lose so that they think they look better, and they're exhausted and depleted because they're working out 7 days a week and going to Orange Theory every night, right? Like, it's like, get back to the bio-individuality, but we have that filter as people on social media that tell us something is bad when we're just perhaps seeing it misapplied.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think also like it's age too. Like a lot of these younger, and I say this and I recognize I'm in my 20s. Okay.
You can be an honorary 40-year-old for a second.
Thank you. A lot of influencers are in their 20s and they're like, you don't need these things. Like a lot of the nutritionists that I watch and follow and stuff, right? Like they're like really young, like, late 20s, maybe early 30s.
And like maybe they got out of school last year.
Yeah. And it's like, this is what I know you need. And it's like, dude, like, come talk to me when you're 40 or 50, because a lot of people don't realize that like what you do now in your 20s is what sets you up for failure or progress when you're in your 50s, right? Because like I saw a TikTok and this chick was like, which is a lot like Reels, right? And she was like, all these 20-year-olds, dude, I was hot and sexy on tamales and Red Bulls in my 20s. Come talk to me when you're 50, you know? And like I was like, he has a valid point, right? Like if you're going to talk in general population terms, like I never do that. I never say the general population needs this, right? I say, this is what I find works. And if you want to try it, come work with me.
Yeah.
But if you're going to speak in general population terms, like at least have some time and experience behind your belt. Like there's some like studies are great, right? I brought this up the other day because a lot of these people use studies. Controlled studies are very needed. Science is very needed. We wouldn't understand almost anything that we know biologically or nutritionally without it, right? I completely recognize that. But realize that if there's a study of like a control group of like 40 people, so 20 people in one group, 20 people in the other, or even 1,000 people in one group and 1,000 in the other, that's 2,000 people. And they're trying to use the results of that study to speak for 7 billion. That's insane. It's insane. And the fact that we do that and we don't look at anecdotal evidence of the person, it's outstanding that they're still willing, even though those generic statements, they have science, this study says this, but to translate that into this is what humans need in general,
right.
I think that's irresponsible in my opinion.
Right. I agree that like, it's like, we need to look at the data. We need to look at the study and exactly what you said. We need to understand that. So recently there was a study. There are two studies I'm thinking of, and I'm trying not to get them confused. I know one of them is Ponzer. I think they both might be Ponzer, but they looked at the range of caloric intake in maintenance for different people at the same amount of lean body mass. And it varied wildly, right? Like one person's data point was down at like 1,200 calories. Another person was like at 4,000. And these people seemed like they should have the same caloric need, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, what does that say about online keto calculators or online TDEE calculators? It says that it will tell you what the average is, but it's not going to tell you what yours should be.
Exactly. Like, man, okay, so when people come, because like my PDF program and myself, I have a certain mathematical equation I use that I came up with. It's very simple. It's just your body weight times 10 and then activity multiplier. It's super simple. But even like when people come in like, oh, I it's not working. I got my macros. I'm like, where'd you get a calculator? And I'm like, oh, okay. We need to talk. Cause it's like, there's so like, dude, like again, that's a whole nother thing. Cause it's like, well,
many things.
There's so many things. Cause it's like, okay, well, how's your gut doing? Okay. Well, do you produce enough T3 hormone? Okay. If you do, does your T3 hormone into your cells? How's the inflammation around your cell membranes? If that's the case, you could have cellular hypothyroidism. Okay. How do we rectify that? Like so many things could be impacting your metabolic rate and how many calories you burn throughout the day. And like all of that, none of that gets calculated into a calculator. Bottom line, It just doesn't.
Right. So, but like that was my brain just drew that comparison, which is to say, yeah, we studied this population and on average, these were the results, but you're a person, not a population. Yeah. So we're going to have to try things. And I'm always like, well, what's the downside of an experiment for any person? Like if you're saying like, well, I don't know if this is going to work for me or that's going to work for me. Is there a risk or a downside to trying it? And if the risk is like, there are certain things that are too risky to try, right? Like certain drugs you're like, that is too risky. I'm not going to take that, even though the possible upside might be incredible. I'm not willing to accept the possible downsides. But, like eating just steak for a month, what's the possible downside, right? Like, is there a huge negative impact? And am I willing to take myself on as an experiment?
Totally agree with that. And I like that term. I'm a person, not a population. I think that should be a t-shirt.
Okay. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Well, I remember being at Low Carb Denver, like 2-3 years ago. And somebody said something about, well, it's just an anecdote. It's just an anecdote. And then it like caught on that like everyone, when they got up to ask a question was like, I'm an anecdote. And, cause it's like, it's that same concept that it's like, well, anecdotes aren't studies. It's like, well, we're a bunch of anecdotes that have something to say though.
Yeah. Anyways. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll move on. But is there anything else in what we've talked about today you feel like is an important point we need to touch on before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think we went over a lot. I think the biggest takeaways for me, just to reiterate them, is If you have a way of keto that works for you and you've seen that way work for others, you should drive it home and you should be passionate about it. But I think also, like, if you're going to work with individuals, like, be willing to be a little bit more outside the box, be willing to get out of your comfort zone for their sake. But at the same time, realize that you are meant to impact the people you're meant to impact, and just be passionate about that and pursue it. But also, like, be willing to do what's best for you through a ketogenic lens. Like, realize that a lot of people try to fit the mold of a ketogenic diet. And I think where people really find their freedom is when they take the ketogenic diet and they try to get it to fit their mold.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point. All right. Well, I think we'll stop there so poor Haley can actually have some playtime.
Oh, poor Haley.
I know. She's been so good.
So good.
Thanks, Haley.
So good. Thank you, Haley. Are you going to clap for everybody?
She's like, no, I'm eating my hand, Dad. Oh, good job.
Good job, mamas. Good job. Good job.
All right. Well, this has been super fun. So tell the audience, who do you work with? What do you do? A short statement. What should people know and how do they find you?
Absolutely. So I'm a nutritional therapist and keto coach. So I have programs that range from basic weight management, where we focus on your weight, whether that's fixing your metabolism or just helping you lose weight properly and reverse dieting. I have holistic health, which is just basically that plus mindset work. And then I have nutritional therapy, where we get a lot more clinical. We look at blood, we look at nutritional deficiencies, etc. You can find all of that at theketoroad.com. I am universally, you type in the Keto Road on any social media platform or Google, and I will pop up. I'm proud to say that. I'm a one-stop shop. So the Keto Road anywhere, and you'll find me. And then I have a podcast called The Road Podcast. It's a little stagnant right now, but the episodes that have been recorded are quite nice. So you can check that out.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to put those links in the show notes, and we will let Haley have some playtime now and get on with our day. So I think people are going to get a lot out of this discussion. I know I really enjoyed it. So thanks for joining me.
I did too. Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for